Good afternoon, everyone in Science and Values. What I want to do in this video, this is not a lecture video for this week, but I do want to talk to you a little bit about the paper that you have that's due Monday, the final day of the course. It's due Monday, July 13th, and it requires you to watch the film Concussion and then to evaluate the film in light of the framework from the essay by Heather Douglas. But I'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of that paper in a second. What I want to say first is just a little bit about writing a philosophy paper. What are you doing when you're writing a philosophy paper? What's happening? As opposed to papers you've written in other classes while you've been at the university. And I usually give this spiel to students when I teach in person as well. And so I just want to talk about it a little bit. As some of you hopefully either get started on the paper or may hopefully finish it. But, my guess is Sunday night will probably be when a lot of you start, which is fine. Anyways, so let me just say something about writing the paper. When you're writing a philosophy paper, what you're doing is you are making an argument. You are making a claim. The claim is your thesis statement. And so in a philosophy paper, you're saying, I need to, so for example, in the introduction, I need to see something like, in this paper, I will argue X. Now, the thing is, you're not coming up with an original thesis. I mean, to an extent you are, but you have a limited range of options. You're going to be thinking about, the character portrayed by Will Smith in the movie, the doctor portrayed by Will Smith, and think about whether he acted morally appropriately or not in light of the framework that Heather Douglas. Now, so there may be some nuance in there. You might want to say he acted appropriately in these ways, he communicated appropriately in these ways, but not in these ways. So you may want to have a little bit of nuance to your thesis. But at the end of the day, I'm not necessarily asking you to come up with an original claim. You've got the Heather Douglas framework and you've got the movie. So there's going to be a limited range of options for what your thesis is going to be. And so, but in the introduction, I want to see the specific phrasing of, in this paper, I will argue X. Because that's what you're doing in a philosophy paper. That's why the use of the first person is encouraged. Students are often resistant to wanting to use it. But I'm pretty insistent upon it because the genre of a philosophy paper is that you, the author, are making an argument and making the claim. So it helps you own the argument. It helps you own the thesis. And then you are defending that thesis in your paper. So the introduction is the statement of your thesis. I will argue. And then the body of the paper is your argument. It's what you told me you were going to do so when you say I will argue, then you argue. And then the conclusion is I have argued, right? So it's I will argue, I am arguing, and I have argued, right? That's the kind of the three, that's what's happening. And so the use of the first person in the philosophy paper does not have to be, you don't have to overdo it, but you definitely need to have the use of the first person, the I in the introduction, in the transitions to the paper, and in the conclusion. The introduction, I am going to argue X. In order to argue X, I will first do this, I will then do this, and I will then do this. And you can see that in the sample paper that I've uploaded. I've uploaded that paper because I think it's an exemplary student paper. I think it's a good student paper. And so I, look for the use of the first person in particular. You can ignore most of the content because it was a paper written for a different class on different material. But pay attention to the transitions and the use of the first person because I chose that paper because I think the paper is well done. So when I say that, so you have the introduction. The first, in the paper itself, you need to have transitional phrases. And I know this, this is something that, that has been emphasized to you in writing papers going all the way back to like grade school. But in a philosophy paper, it's really important because it's called signposting. It's sort of, it's doing one part of the paper and then actually telling your reader that you've done this and now you're going to do this. And so it guides your reader through the argument. As you finish one step of your argument, you tell them that you're finished. You don't leave the reader guessing what you're doing in the paper. You actually kind of hold the reader's hand and you say, I have done this and now I will do this. And you can come right out and say it. You don't have to be, on the nose about it to that extent. You can find a way to say it, but I really am going to be looking for the use of those first person transitional phrases so that when you're done with one part of the argument, you lead the reader and tell them you're about to do the next thing. And the easiest way to do that in this paper is that I think the easiest way to do it is to try to do one thing at a time. One of the biggest errors I see in student writing is you're trying to accomplish too much at the same time. That's why having an outline and having the steps of your argument will be important. So, for example, if you're going to say, I will present Heather Douglas's argument for moral responsibility, do that. Don't tell me about the film Concussion yet. You're welcome to present a brief synopsis of the film at the beginning, but just present Heather Douglas's argument. Just discuss causal. Don't try to have the film and the argument going on at the same time. So I think the easiest way to do this paper is to do the introduction, present Heather Douglas's argument step by step. Go through the argument the way that she does. So the way that Heather Douglas's argument works, she first provides what is moral responsibility. In order to show what moral responsibility is, she makes a distinction between causal and moral responsibility. Once she has that in place, once she has a general account of moral responsibility in place, then she says we can be held responsible for the actions that we can be praised and blamed for. We can be praised and blamed for the things we intended to bring about. We can also be praised and blamed for the things we didn't intend to bring about. And then she goes into reckless and negligence. Then reckless and negligence leads us eventually into role in general, but you need to get all those distinctions in there, but present her argument as she presents it. You don't have to simply regurgitate it. You should try to explain it in your own words, but don't leave anything out. Treat me, the reader, as if I've never read Heather Douglas. No detail is insignificant. So present her argument. Then, once you have presented her argument, then you can say, in light of Heather Douglas's account of moral responsibility, one can apply it to the film Concussion. And here's why. And then you proceed to do that. But I would strongly suggest you present the argument first, then you show how it applies to the film. Don't try to do... So if you have step 1 and step 2 and step 3, and in the introduction you tell me, I'm going to do this first, I'm going to do this second, and I'm going to do this third, you don't want to do 1 and 2 at the same time, because then you aren't... the introduction is the promise that you're going to do X, Y, and Z. So that means X, then Y, then Z, not X and Y and Z, but X, then Y, then Z. Right? So anyways, I know that seems kind of basic, but I read a lot of student papers in any given semester, and the biggest error I see is the failure to because that's what an argument is. An argument is a series of steps. In order for step 2 to make sense, step 1 has to be done. In order for step 3 to make sense, step 2 has to be done. And they have to be done separately. You can't mix them. So anyways, I've gone on about that long enough, but one step at a time. And I think that's really kind of a lot of what I have to say. Present her argument, apply it to the film. And I really do hope that in watching this film, it does give you a sense of what I'm looking for. Because at the end of the day, this gets back into the way to communicate uncertainty. How should a scientist communicate uncertainty? And there are different ways they can do it. They can be bold. They can kind of look at the evidence and decide that, well, there's not as much evidence here as I would like there to be. But this is a dire emergency. People are dying. Football players are dying as a result of this research, or as a result of what I found out. And so I can't remain silent. I can't say too little. If I say too much, it might scare people. If I say too little, it's going to confuse people. If I don't say anything, people will die. And so trying to figure out whether you think the protagonist in this film, does he strike the right balance? And so so this is a really sort of real world application of Heather Douglas's argument to a real, because the research surrounding football concussions is not, it's important, but there's so many stakeholders here. We can't simply abolish football, but maybe we can play it more safely. But if we're just playing it more safely, or is that just kind of window dressing? Do the concussion protocols and the better helmets, do they really do anything? Or is it just a way for the NFL to kind of look like they're, making it safer, when in reality they're not really doing much, but they can look like they are. So anyways, there's a lot of stakeholders here, and so you have to think about all that as you apply Heather Douglas to this film. So that's all I have to say about the paper. 5 to 7 pages, and I do need it to be due by noon on the 13th because your grades are due by Wednesday morning early, and so I have to have time to grade those papers. So unfortunately, I can't give you the midnight deadline. I have to have it by noon so that I have most of Monday and Tuesday because there are 20 of you, and so I need time to read all that. So please let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to do a Zoom meeting about the paper, but please watch the film. It's a good film, you know. For those of you who are obviously a lot of you go to Clemson and you're huge football fans, and so it's it may be something that makes you a little uncomfortable as a fan of football, but it's important, And some of you may know about it already. It's an old film anyway, so it's an older film relatively speaking, and so you may already know about it. But please watch the film. Don't just read a summary about it online. Reference details from the film in the paper. Reference lines from the film in your paper. That will really stand out to me as a reason to give you a good grade. But I think you have, a lot of what you need is on Canvas. Hopefully this video will help you, and please let me know if you have any questions.